just a quick rundown of how how it happened today is we're gonna get a quick opening and the rundown of the objectives from Afrewatch. Of course, I'm just gonna share with us the reason behind this research and why we decided to embark on this particular piece of work. And we're going to zoom into the 5 country case studies to actually see how the resource for infrastructure project structured in those different countries and what are the key findings from those different countries. And then we'll come back to look at the cross-country lessons and policy implications, which we can take forward in terms of advocacy actions. And from the 5 countries, we're going to listen to 5 very seasoned experts who worked with our partners in those 5 countries to be able to generate this piece of work and how that compares across the board. And then we will get into a question and answer session for 25 minutes, and that would be it. And of course, that would set the scene for the launching of our report, which we would then circulate. At this moment, I would invite Emmanuel, the director of
Inviter Emmanuel, le directeur
Afrewatch International, to just officially open the webinar and set the scene for us. Emmanuel, over to you.
Yeah.
I'll shut down my screen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric and our colleague for attending this webinar. I think it's a great moment for us as Afrewatch International, but also Afrewatch TRC. So we are happy to convene this event at this time where the actors across the world are trying to have access to critical minerals. And the African continent is one of the continent in the world which has a big deposit of these critical minerals. And if you try to see across Africa, you will see that there is now we used to have Chinese players coming, but now we have more players coming. You have EU signing with African countries MOUs for them to have access to minerals. And the US has just signed with DRC an economic and deal. So I mean, this is a critical moment to do this analysis or to publish this report because, we used to have the win-win contracts across the continent coming from Chinese, let's say China. They used to present themselves that they are making African, they give better deal than other actors. So for us, I think it was a moment where we tried to come together as a continent to see how we can analyze those contracts. So we decided to do that across 5 countries: DRC, Guinea, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Cameroon. This is just an example for us to see if what China is saying that they are giving African countries a better deal, is that the case? And that's one idea. But the second idea is that to help as African organization, African country, if we can share information, but also get lessons learned from this work we are doing together. So this is the time also to say thank you to all colleagues from Zela, from Publish What You Pay, Youth for Development, and Action Mine from Guinea, and Publisher to Pay from Zambia to say thank you so much for this collaboration. This is a good way for organization working together and to try to push African its interest, but also to see how those actors they are playing across the borders. I'm not going to take so much of your time. I can say just thank you so much. So this is a beginning of discussion. I hope we are going to have more discussion on this issue. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks very much, Emmanuel, for that setting that scene. At this moment, permit me share my screen again, just to give you some more thoughts around this whole idea of the resource for infrastructure model. I know the speakers are going to dive deep into this, but again, it's just to give us some quick updates on what the resource for infrastructure model is all about. It's infrastructure finance through loans linked to resource revenues, where the resources of specific countries are used as collateral to access financing on basis of the existence of resources, and it's often structured through Chinese policy banks and contractors. And repayment is always linked to mineral production or export revenues. And of course, it's designed to accelerate infrastructure development in resource-rich countries that are struggling with the issue of meeting the
riches en
growing
ressources
demand
qui ont des
for
problèmes
infrastructure. So through
d'avoir
the
une
different
mauvaise
presentations,
infrastructure,
we are going
une
to hear
infrastructure plutôt.
from the different panelists. And the first one we want to hear from is Blondel. Blondel Seleno is a lawyer specialized in environmental law and sustainable development and pursuing a doctorate focus on forest management in the field. He's learned about natural resource governance with GIZ and then with the Ministry of Planning in Cameroon, working with public actors and communities. And today he works with youth for promotion of development and defends the rights of indigenous peoples affected by iron exploitation in Lobe and by the Making Dam, which is the case he's going to speak about from Cameroon. He has also participated in this study particularly as one of the main consultants, and he combines law analysis, advocacy for fairer decision in the face of climate change. So that's the first case study we are going to hear about, which is around the hydropower, which is underperforming in Cameroon, and it's linked to the Chinese resource for infrastructure model. So, Blondel, you have the floor for the first presentation.
Bonjour à tous. Bonjour à tous. Merci pour
Hello, everyone,
la parole
and
donnée.
thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Je voudrais savoir, est-ce qu'il est possible
I would like to
savoir de
know
partager l'écran
whether
ou bien
it is
c'est-
possible for you to share the screen, or should I share it?
Yes, I can share it if you want. Let me just pull it up.
Non, je préfère. D'accord, je préfère. Merci.
Yes, I prefer that if you can share my slides, please.
Je veux savoir, c'est déjà bon parce que je ne le vois pas encore sur l'écran.
I cannot see the presentation. Are you sharing it?
Yeah, I'm trying to share it. Hold on.
D'accord.
Okay, thanks.
Désolé. Okay, it's not sharing for some reason on my end. I'm going to try one more thing. It's not letting me share on my end. The PowerPoint's not opening up on the screen. Eric, I don't know if you're able
Yes.
to.
Well, let me give you the trial from my end as well. Okay. Looks like you've got it on. It's come on.
I think, yeah, if you're sharing it, then yeah, it's on.
It's a bit.
Oui, bonjour à tous.
Okay, hello everyone.
Allô, bonjour à tous.
Yes, can you hear me?
Merci pour la parole donnée.
Thank you very much for giving me the
Je
floor.
représente et
And
représente
I am
une
here
association qui est
representing
Cameroun.
an
Nous
association
avons
used for
travaillé
promotion of
pratiquement sur le
development,
barrage
and we have
de Mekine,
worked on the
qui
Mekin
est un
hydroelectric
barrage
dam,
qui a été financé
which
par
is a dam
la
that was
Chine,
financed
comme vous
by
pouvez le
China.
constater.
And you can see this on the
Dans
first
mon sommaire,
screen.
pour la présentation
So
du
this is a
sommaire, je vais
summary for
d'abord
the
commencer avec
presentation.
un
First of
contexte
all,
présenter
we will show a bit of context
le
and the
montage
cases.
financier, les
Then
différentes
we will
gouvernances, le
focus
bilan
on the
opérationnel
different
et
characteristics, the
plan
technical
économique, et ainsi que
specifications of
les
the dam, the
impacts
financial arrangements,
socio-économiques et
and the budget.
communautaires,
That means the
sans
socio-economic
oublier
and
les impacts
community
environnementaux et
impacts, of course,
sanitaires et la
environmental and health
matérialité globale
impacts. Then we will do like a
de ce
global
modèle de
assessment
financement
or
et ce que nous avons
diagnosis,
apporté comme
which is
information et
leads us to rethink this model, and then recommendations and
le
lessons learned.
modèle ressources contre infrastructure est un
So the
processus de financement
R4I resources for
contre
infrastructure
l'accès aux
model
ressources.
is
En
Chinese
fait, le
funding
projet
in
de
exchange
Mekin,
for access to
barrage
infrastructure. And the
hydroélectrique, avait
Mekin
prévu de
project, the
produire
Mecan project,
15 mégawatts
has as a goal is to
d'énergie sur
produce
plus de 2
15
000
megawatts
hectares à
of
la région du
hydroelectric
Sud Cameroun.
energy on the Jai River in the
L'objectif
south region of
initial était
Cameroon. The
d'alimenter
initial objective
d'énergie
was
dans 8
to
communes
supply
dans la région
electricity
du
to
Sud et de
8
renforcer le réseau
municipalities
électrique
in
en
the southern
Afrique du Sud.
region and strengthen the
Le
southern
constructeur
interconnected
principal,
network,
c'était une
the
entreprise chinoise
RRIS for its acronym in
appelée
French.
Société
The
nationale
manufacturer is China
d'énergie
National
ingénierie
Electric
électrique,
Engineering Corporation,
et le principal financier était Exim Bank
CNEEC, and the main
China.
funder is Exim
Le
Bank
modèle
of China.
opératoire de financement,
The
c'est un
operating
système de financement
procedure
lié à la
is
position
tied
dominante de
financing. So
l'entreprise
this is
chinoise
financing tied to the
qui
dominant
gérait les
position of the
aspects techniques
Chinese
sans ingérence locale
investor,
significative
managing technical
et pas de
aspects without
contrôle
significant local
vraiment assez
interference
axé de l'État.
and limited
Le projet devait
national
symboliser à
control.
peu près
So the project was
enfin,
meant
c'est
to
un projet
symbolize the potential of
sino-camerounais
the
avec
Sino-Cameroonian partnership
l'implication financière de
for
chacun
energy
de ces deux
development.
pays, c'est-à-dire le Cameroun et la
So
Chine.
for both
Dans
countries,
les caractéristiques techniques
but in
du barrage,
it has
comme vous le
become a
voyez
bit the
bien,
antithesis of that. The technical
15
specifications you can
mégawatts
see on the
et à
screen,
peu près
15 megawatts
de
and
gigawatt hour, qui en fait
approximately
équivaut à
100
alimenter
gigawatt
près
hours. So
de
that's the estimated annual
près de
production. And it could cover
en fait plus de 100
more than
en fait une dizaine de milliers de foyers
100.
selon un
So
standard de
like 10
consommation
million
locale
homes
prévu
approximately.
par
That was
le
the
barrage.
estimated coverage of the dam.
Dans le montage financier, qui est une partie franchement
With respect to the
intéressante,
financial
c'est
arrangement
que le
and the
financement à
budget
lui seul couvre 25
overruns,
milliards de francs CFA, comme on l'a
the
dit
it was
par
the initial
l'entrée
cost of
chinoise
25 billion
à
FCFA. The
compter
Exim
près
Bank of
de
China
95 à
was
85%
contributing
de la dette
approximately
constitutionnelle,
from
dont la
75
somme
to
qui débloque
85% of the
la
concessional
durée du
loan.
paiement,
The interest
c'était
rate was
prévu de 20
2%. The
ans,
grace period was
dont
4
notamment il
years, and
existait une
the
période de grâce, donc
interest
pendant
rate
laquelle les 4
term
premières années
was
devaient
20
simplement payer
years.
des
So there
intérêts.
was a grace
Mais
period
il y
of
avait
4
quelques
years during
charges
which no
supplémentaires
principal was
comme
repaid.
des
And
frais
then there were
d'investissement
management fees. There
et
were
l'État du Cameroun, par
0.3 and
devait
commitment
apporter
fees. And the state of Cameroon
15%
had
de
to
sa
contribute
contribution
15
financière.
to
Donc,
25%.
le coût révisé, en fait, le coût a été révisé
So
en
the
2020,
revised cost in
où
2020,
il y a eu une hausse de 38%,
which
environ
increased
34,5 milliards de
38%
francs
and
francs
ended up
CFA.
being
Donc, la sanction
34.5 billion
équivalent au paiement
FCFA.
personnel en ce moment
And the power plant was not yet fully operational at the time of this overrun. So the critical points were that no independent financial audit was carried out, the contracts were not made public, the long-term profitability was severely compromised, and the increased public debt had no equivalent productive counterparts. With respect to governance failures, we had an overall systemic opacity at every stage of the project life cycle. Contractual transparency was an issue. Contracts were not published or were not subject to parliamentary oversight, and lack of independent financial audits. Environmental compliance was granted, but with many violations of national laws, and the construction was launched without a full assessment of environmental and social impacts. There was one environmental impact assessment in 2010 for only two components of the project for the dam. So it was just to illustrate the level at which there was a sort of a light environmental impact assessment. With respect to institutional capacities, regulatory institutions lacking adequate technical expertise, there was a lack of monitoring, hydrological monitoring, and no independent oversight of the construction process. With respect to community inclusion, the indigenous communities, Baka and Bayeli, were excluded from consultation processes and also from the resettlement process discussions. There was an accelerated implementation schedule, of course, at the expense of consultation and consultation. And there was a lack of effective implementation of the environmental and social management program, ESMP. With respect to the operational assessment, we have a timeline filled with failures. This is the timeline of the breakdowns and the delay. Initial power up April 2019. Between April and May, there was an immediate failure of the neutral point coil NPC. 1 in 3 alternators were out of service. So these alternators were having many problems. In January 2022, there was the commercial launch. So this is 18 months late between 2019 and 2022. And 2022 to 2024 had recurring breakdowns with a peak in September 16, 2024, total shutdown of the power plant involving a failure of the first floor water pumps, and this was exacerbated by flooding. So this had a problem in design and in the installation. And also in terms of maintenance that was completely independent from the Chinese company, the CNEEC. And we also verified that there was an insufficient skills transfer because there was a dependence on sustainable technologies and related infrastructure that remained unfinished. This included flooded bridges that were not repaired, and commercial contracts with Eneo and Sonatrach that was still not finalized. With respect to the socioeconomic and community impacts, the local populations, so villages that were affected by the construction of the dam, were villages of approximately 5,000 inhabitants, Bengbis, Endom, and Somalomo. The first victims, however, were Niabizu and Awon. These were the new sites for displaced populations, according to the Resettlement Action Plan. So we had to resettle 720 people, and this very few people were really benefited from the resettlement. The initial promise was that this project would be providing reliable electricity to 8 communities in the south: Bengbis, Jum, Zotele, Meyomesi, Mintom, and Oveng. But the reality is that there are frequent and unpredictable power outages, and there's like a chronic energy uncertainty for the populations served. We have direct consequences, of course. Healthcare facilities are paralyzed during power cuts. Education, of course, disruptions in the operation of schools. This affects the local economy and public trust in general. So the dam's contribution to the overall development of the region remains marginal. This is the problem, because the dam, as it is right now, it doesn't really create employment. It doesn't really provide the energy to the population. So, of course, the populations are very discontent with the situation. And 2 years after the start of the works, this is when it was able to become operational. So just to show you how these facilities and how this affected the populations that were not considered, they were not taken seriously. And of course, not considering the health impacts and environmental impacts. When we think of environmental and health impacts specifically, we have deforestation affecting the submerged forest and including protected areas of the Ja River, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this is a direct threat to biodiversity. And of course, it is very important for UNESCO and to preserve the status of the site. The health risks include water stagnation upstream of the dam, increase in malaria cases in riverside communities, and of course, no adequate health mitigation measures in place because the impact studies were, like I said, quite light. And insufficient. So this sort of shows a bit an overview of the impacts. In terms of a global assessment or global diagnosis, the case of Mekin reveals the structural flaws of the R4I system in Cameroon. In terms of governance, we see clearly a contractual opacity, lack of independent control, and violation of national standards. In terms of finance, a budget overrun of 38%, and increased debt without proportional return. From the point of view, from the technical point of view, design flaws, chronic breakdowns, and since the consultants were Chinese, this created a situation that led to the total shutdown in 2024. In terms of sovereignty, technological dependence on the CNEEC, and there is virtually no skills transfer occurring. In terms of the environment, a massive deforestation and threat to a UNESCO site, including health risks, and with respect to inclusion, marginalization of indigenous communities, lack of effective consultation, and in terms of development, limited energy contribution, untapped potential, and eroded public trust. So instead of catalyzing sustainable growth, the R4I model has reinforced indebtedness, technological dependence, and institutional erosion. Raising serious questions because in terms of the technological dependence specifically, this raises serious questions about long-term economic sovereignty. And with respect to recommendations and lessons learned, transparency, the publication of financing and construction contracts is necessary, as well as independent financial audits, which are mandatory at each phase of the project. During the execution and at each phase. Strengthening and building institutional capacities involving to equip the regulatory institutions with the necessary technical expertise and establish permanent and independent environmental monitoring. In terms of technological sovereignty, there must be a publication of contractual clauses for the effective transfer of skills and establish national maintenance teams. From the construction phase onwards, with respect to environmental and social compliance, to conduct studies before any work begins, at the beginning of the projects and before the implementation, and also, of course, effectively implement the PGES and ensure consultation with indigenous communities. And strategic oversight of R4I partnership is essential to rebalance the contractual power dynamic and systematically assess the net development value by integrating externalities. And of course, energy security and the restoration of public trust require immediate. Yes.
Can you kindly round off your time? It's almost over, please. Merci.
Bon, en termes de conclusion,
so when it comes to conclusions, what we can say is that well, we have had a specific approach, as I said before. The government has insisted that it's necessary to carry out all the necessary studies before starting out the jobs. So this is based on a decree that dates back to June 17, 2025, which has to do with carrying out all the necessary assessments before getting started on a project. With regards to financing, well, the projects that are financed are usually public-private financed. What they receive is public-private finance, and sometimes usually there is an association or partnership between foreign companies and the government of Cameroon. So this is what I had to say in connection with MECIN. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Blondel, for that very insightful presentation. And we note that some participants are putting up questions, which we will come back to, but panelists, feel free to respond to some of the questions directly. And we will come back together again to look at the questions that are not answered at the end of the presentations. Now, the next presenter is Dr. Barry Omar. Dr. Barry is a PhD holder in political science, specializing in the geopolitics of mineral resources, research and a training officer at the Action Mines Guinea, and is the head of the Center for Studies and Training in Governance of Extractive Industries in Guinea. He's going to take us through the case in Guinea, which looks at specifically the bauxite-backed infrastructure framework and how that sits within the framework of the Resource for Infrastructure Initiative in Guinea and the governance and socioeconomic implications of that process in Guinea. Dr. Omar Barry, vous avez la parole.
Dr. Omar Barry, you have the floor.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone.
Bonjour, Dr. Barry.
Good morning, Dr.
Merci.
Barry.
J'avais envoyé ma présentation.
Thank
Est-ce
you.
que vous pouvez partager l'écran?
Can someone share my presentation on the screen, please?
Brittany, can you stop this from your end and then you can share Dr. Barry's, please.
That I wasn't sharing that screen. It wasn't letting me share before, but I can. try again.
Yeah, because it's not from my end as well, so probably,
Yeah, Blondel, maybe?
yeah. S'il vous plaît, Blondel, vous pouvez arrêter l'écran de votre côté.
Yes, Mr. Blondel, can you stop your screen share
Je
on
peux
your
aussi essayer
side?
de le faire à partir de voir si je...
I can try and do it myself. Let's see if I can go ahead and share my screen.
Là, je crois que je me suis déconnecté, c'est bon.
I think that I just disconnected my
Ok, je peux
screen.
essayer moi de le faire.
Everything should be okay to go. I can
Yeah.
try and do it.
Est-ce que là tout le monde voit mon écran? C'est bon?
Can you see
Oui.
my screen? Yes.
Ok.
Ok.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank
Je
you,
suis
everyone.
Dr. Barry Omar. Je travaille pour Action Guinée.
My name is
Je vais
Umar
partager
Bari.
avec
I
vous
work
l'expérience de la
for
Guinée dans le cadre
for
des
Guinea,
R4I.
and I will share the
Je rappelle
experience
que
of
la Guinée
Guinea in
s'est
connection with
engagée
the
avec
initiatives
le modèle de
R4I.
coopération
Guinea has
R4I
based
à partir de
itself on the cooperation
2017
model or
avec la
R4I
signature
from
de ce qu'on appelle en
2017
Guinée
with
l'accord
the
cadre
signing
sur
of
l'intention de près de
the
20 milliards de dollars
agreement
en échange
on
de permis
a memorandum
d'exploitation pour
of
la société
understanding
chinoise
and
qui
also
a
an exchange involving the permission for exploitation
Ma
of different
présentation va
areas in
porter
my
sur ces
country.
principaux éléments
So my
d'introduction,
presentation will have to do
objectifs
with different
généralistes et
elements. So we'll
méthodologie,
talk
les sources
about
technologiques
introduction,
de la
general
Guinée
objectives,
et les
specific
principales
objectives,
consultations.
methodologies,
Donc, pour
sources of
aller gagner en
data, the
temps, je vais
case
directement
of Guinea,
aller
and the
sur
sources of consultation. So
les
I
éléments de
will
méthodologie, puisque
talk
les
about
éléments
the
d'introduction, je les
methodology
partage un
because,
peu ça
well,
ensemble.
basically,
C'est le
the
déficit persistant
introduction
d'infrastructures
details
de la
are
Guinée
something
pendant
that
les
we
5
already
ans
know about.
dernières
Is the
années
persisting deficit
et
of
leur effet,
infrastructure, which
les
we have seen over
principaux
the past few
barrières
years.
de financement internationaux
Also, the
issus des pays
main
européens ou américains
usually
avec
financing
l'instabilité
tends to be granted
chronique,
by
l'instabilité
countries in America
chronique que
and
la
in Europe.
Guinée a connue ces 10 dernières années. Et la Guinée, à partir de 2010, avec la réforme de son code
Guinea, starting
minier, a
2010,
attiré de
with
plus
the
en plus
reform of its
d'investisseurs chinois dans
mining
le secteur
code,
de
has
de la bauxite.
begun to
Et d'ailleurs,
receive
la
a
production de
growing number
bauxite de la
of
Guinée va
Chinese
passer de 10 millions de
investors
tonnes
within its
à plus
frontiers,
de
and
180
the
millions de tonnes
production
aujourd'hui.
have
Donc, la
gone
Chine,
has gone
c'est un
from 10
projet au
million
fil
tons to
des années
140
comme
tons,
premier partenaire économique
140
de la
million
Guinée
tons, of
et
course.
le
So
principal
Guinea
producteur de la bauxite
has
et
become
un des
one
principaux
of
partenaires
the
économiques
main
dans le secteur
producers, and
des mines.
China has become one of the main
Alors, pour aller
partners in this
rapidement sur
endeavor.
les éléments de
So let us
méthodologie,
move
nous
quickly
avons
to the
exploité
methodology
des données
that was used.
issues des
We
rapports
have
parlementaires, mais aussi des notes
mm,
d'analyse du ministère des Finances, notamment la
we
Direction
have carried out different
générale du
assessments,
service
not
de la
only at
dette,
the level of
mais nous avons
parliament, but
également
also at the
effectué une
level of
petite
the
mission
ministry in
sur le
order to
terrain
also take
pour
control
lancer des
over the
campagnes sur
servicing of
les
the debt.
répercussions
And
environnementales et
we also
sociales
did
du
some field
projet
studies so
de
as to detect
construction
the
de la route social and environmental
repercussions
repercussions
that
de
our
400 km qui a
different
été financée
projects
dans le
could
cadre du
have.
projet
Uh,
ressources compte
in
infrastructure signé en 2017.
This is based on the projects that were signed starting
Donc, pour le cas de la
2017, from
Guinée, je le disais à
2017
l'entame, ce projet a été
onwards.
signé en
So
2017
this
lors de la visite
project,
du
as I
président
said
Macron des RDC
before, was
en
this
Chine et visait à
framework
mobiliser 20
agreement was signed
milliards de
in
dollars
2017. The
sur 20
objective
ans
was to mobilize
en échange,
$20
en fait,
billion
d'octroyer des
over a
permis
period of
d'exploitation
20
de
years
bauxite et
so as to
bauxite
finance
chinoise
the
tels que
infrastructures
le
with the
CDM-Chine
bauxite
et,
resources.
et SPIC.
So,
Donc, cet accord a été
so
signé entre
this
le
agreement
conseiller du
was
président de la République en charge des
signed
investissements étrangers,
between
qu'on
the
appelait le
Presidential
Conseil présidentiel
Council of
d'investissement et
Investments
des
in
autorités
Guinea and
Le
the
remboursement est garanti sur les revenus
Chinese
tirés de l'exploitation de
authorities.
poids à
And
chinoise
the
à
objective
travers la
here
création
was
d'un
to
compte
do
secret pour la
exploitation
bauxite.
of by
Donc,
three
une partie des
enterprises, three
recettes
mining
provenant de
companies in
l'exploitation
China,
de la
and the
bauxite
payments
passée
were
par la
given
société chinoise
to
est versée dans ce
an
compte secret
account
et l'argent est
that was
viré à différents
channeled through the
au
central
niveau de la
bank.
banque chinoise, la
So
banque
So we also, in this case, it was the Chinese Exports Bank that also acted as a collateral or as a warrantor. So there were three groups of projects that were financed, and what matters most about this project is the reconstruction of the national road number one. This is the main road that connected several points in the country. This repair was done over a length of 45 kilometers. So the funding was obtained as part of this framework agreement that I mentioned before. And this implied a reconstruction of this road that was seriously degraded. And the third point of the project was constructing or building regional universities. So the only part that was actually materialized was the repair of the road, and the regional construction project did not come to fruition. So the funding was obtained before the appearance of the Chinese companies that had to be part of the partnership. So this is a particularity of Guinea. So with regard to the main insights that we got from this project, the work started in 2019. This was specifically having to do with the reconstruction work. So the work was carried out without any socio-environmental studies or impact studies, which is contrary to the legislation in Guinea. And there was no environmental impact assessment that had been validated by the Ministry of Environment. So this is in connection with the national route Koyama-Mundebola, and the works that were carried out while destroying two significant forests that were very important for the environment and for natural preservation. And the second thing is that the agreement was classified. It was classified information. It was embargoed, and it was not disseminated. It couldn't be published. But it was never published. So it was never put at the. It was never made available to the public. Between the construction enterprises and the government, they did not publish anything. So well, everything was very opaque. There was no transparency. There was no information that was published. And with regard to
Est-ce que vous pouvez le temps,
can you
votre temps est
please
épuisé?
round up, because your time has well, I will finish right away. Thank you. So we also evaluated the compensation mechanisms of the impacted communities, and despite all of the difficulties that we detected, this project was enabled us to improve the different roads of communication in Guinea. And but even before the end of the construction works, the road started to be targeted because it presented a series of problems. And you can see that, for example, this house was completely destroyed while the works on the road were carried out. So, well, this is a table on the three projects. Well, you can see that the road project involved 328 million euros, well, this has never been targeted with any kind of publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for that insightful presentation that highlights the Guinea case. So as a reminder, participants, you can pop up your questions on the question and answer panel. Some will be answered as we go by the panelists, and we can come back to the unanswered questions at some point in our webinar. Now, our next presenter is Albert from Zimbabwe. He's going to present to us the platinum-backed deal in Zimbabwe. Albert has extensive experience working at the intersection of law, trade, and natural resources. He is specialized in Sino-African mining investments and their implications for sustainable development, governance, and human rights in Africa. He focuses on advancing good resource governance and promoting legislative reforms that ensure long-term responsible investment in Africa's natural resources. He has been working extensively on the regulatory and policy aspects of Chinese investments in Africa mining sector, particularly critical minerals, aiming to ensure that these investments not only drive economic growth, but also respect the rights of local communities and contribute to sustainable development. Robert, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for giving me the opportunity. If you can hear.
Can hear you perfectly well. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Eric. So briefly, I'll talk about the Zimbabwe case study, as has already been mentioned. The focus of this research, it was multi-country, and my talk briefly would be to focus on some of the key outcomes, but also what we find. Start off, I think context is everything. It's important to give context as to where Zimbabwe finds itself in the development trajectory. And one of the key things, I think, for Zimbabwe to take note of from a context perspective is that the country has, for a very long time, been isolated from, the Western financiers due to the land reform program, resulted in eviction of white farm owners, commercial farm owners from particularly the UK. So the country has been, isolated under sanctions, and then it has become very, very difficult for the government, for the state to deliver on its, development priorities, also to deliver on its, objectives in terms of economic and infrastructure development needs. So then what has happened is that for a very long time, the country has been focusing on what is known as the Look East. In fact, this is a policy that came into effect early 2000, and this was under the leadership of our former president, Robert Mugabe. Given the relationship that had soured with the Western countries, the country has then now relied more on China in terms of financing for development, but also in terms of investments in many sectors, not only in the mining sector. The country has been relying a lot more on China. And this is, of course, also some historical context to it. Support got from China in terms of the struggle for liberation. So that context, I think, for Zimbabwe is very important. There are not many options for the country in terms of attracting financing for development, and therefore we find ourselves with China being the main and probably the only country that has been financing some of the major infrastructure development projects in Zimbabwe. And what scale Chinese financing in Zimbabwe? So, we looked at dating back from early 2004, they are about 2002. Finance.
Obet,
And this
Your line is breaking. Could it be from our end or your end? You might turn off your screen so we can hear you better. Is that all right?
Turn on. How is it now? Is it better?
Sounds better, yeah.
Okay. Right. So the point I was making is that the country has signed a number of loan agreements with Chinese finance institutions, and some of these are concessional loans, some of them are commercial loans, etc. But however, the question around transparency of all these agreements has always been a major concern for Zimbabwe. And as you can see on your screen there, this is one of the projects that was financed by China Exim Bank, which forwarded a loan of almost $1 billion US dollars to the Zimbabwean government to develop what is called Hwange Unit 7 and 8. So essentially, it's a thermal power station that was financed by a Chinese loan. And the engineering company that was involved in the actual construction of the project again was a Chinese company called Sino Hydro Corporation. Very important, I think, in our context when you talk about energy access, energy security for Zimbabwe, given that the project is now I think the largest in terms of contribution to energy into the national grid. It produces almost around 600 megawatts. But the key question, I think, from a resource-backed, loan, perspective, the loan was one of the loans that also raised concerns, particularly in our parliament, in the Parliament of Zimbabwe, because one of the terms is that this loan was supposed to be paid in 20 years payment period. And the question was, whether the parliamentarians had given their green light to approve this, facility, given that the Constitution, there is a requirement that the country shall not contract or at least enter into any agreements that have physical obligations on the state without the approval of Parliament. But we did this project is already up and running. That is the only largely finance that has been financed by Chinese companies or Chinese International Development Bank, China Exim Bank, or China Development, and so forth. There are several of those. This is just a snapshot to say from Hwange in energy. We have also seen projects related to Kariba, for instance, a hydropower plant that was also financed by a Chinese loan, similar to the ICT sector. So there are a number of sectors that have Zimbabwe by Chinese, financial support, including even the airport, the Robert Mugabe International Airport, has recently been expanded by finance from China. But the major one that I want to highlight related to resource-backed loan is the one just here in the picture here, where this is a defense university or college for defense, for study on defense, which was financed a loan from China. In exchange for this, the country mortgaged its diamonds. Of course, the same what is we are seeing now, particularly for transitional minerals, has also been happening even before the age of transition with the rush to secure critical minerals. It was already happening because this was it was an old transaction, if I might put it that way, because this happened in early 2005, thereabout. But we are seeing the same again happening in transition minerals. And I'll talk, I think, just briefly about one particular resource-backed loan in platinum, which is one of the key resources that are produced in Zimbabwe. So the platinum deal presents lessons for Zimbabwe. Why do they present a number of lessons? So essentially what happened here was China Exim Bank and the Zimbabwean government entered into a memorandum of understanding. And this MOU, this memorandum of understanding, was for a proposed $5 billion US concessional finance in exchange for about 50% equity in platinum resources. And the platinum resources were estimated to be around 40 billion US dollars. And the question therefore is what was in it for Zimbabwe that it gets financing for about 5 billion and it exchanges this with resources for 40 billion. So this deal became a major concern for the country because at the time when this deal was entered into, one of the our former finance minister, who is from the opposition party, or it's not the current, but is from a former opposition party, challenged the executive to say, how could we sign a deal such as this one? Much exceeding what the country was going to get in terms of the finance that was going to be extended. And just to add some context, the platinum concession were held by a state-owned entity called Zimbabwe Mining Development Corporation. So it's a state-owned SOE that has got these resources that were supposed to be exchanged, and it became a concern. At least this deal did not go through. I think that's the major point. But issues related to public participation also emerged, that there was no consultation, at least for the communities in the area where this was supposed to happen, but also even the parliament had not approved the deal. The valuation of it became also a major concern, given that they valued the 1 ounce of platinum to be around 10 US dollars, when at the time the global market rate for platinum was far much that for an ounce. It was around $1,167 per ounce of platinum. So this became a major issue for the country to say, how do we sign an agreement such as this that is skewed towards the Chinese, in this instance, because they were going to net in excess of 15 billion out of this deal. So that became a major concern. Why did this fail? As I had already mentioned, so it was disputed in terms of the valuation of the minerals, given that the country looked at how much was the platinum. The resources were about where the Chinese were going to get 50% equity share in this. Again, the resources had been mortgaged prior. There was already another facility that was extended to another Chinese, developed finance institution, already being mortgaged twice. The other, I think, point which led to this deal failing was because of the political divisions, given that at the time the finance minister was from the opposition party and raised concerns around the imbalances in terms of the deal.
Yeah. Obed, can you just round it so we can move to the next on time, your terms?
Thank you. Some of the questions of risk, so confidentiality of the contracts, opacity, despite the fact that the Constitution does provide a framework for contracts to be disclosed. Parliament again was excluded to play its oversight role into this, the deal. Constitutional weakening became also a major issue because there were a number of other deals. We just picked one. where we have also seen now that particular provision in the Constitution being amended to remove parliamentary oversight on some of the loan contracts or agreements that the executive enters into with finance institutions. Public disclosure, the dominance of the executive in contracting also became a major issue that once an agreement has been signed at an executive level, the expectation is that it must be brought before Parliament, but we see a lot of dominance of the executive as well as political interference. When you look at the Wange deal, there were some positive outcomes, as I mentioned earlier on, that the project already it is feeding into national grid by supply about 600 megawatts power. There's reduced power shortages. We have also seen some infrastructure development gains from a number of projects, which of course we have not mentioned here. So from our perspective, resource for infrastructure can also be an enabler to unlock financing, particularly for countries like Zimbabwe, where we are constrained in terms of options or at least alternative financing for development. It can also be a constraint when you look at it from a debt sustainability perspective, dependence, and also issues to do with sovereignty, as well as weakening institutional development, given the fact that some of these deals are negotiated without sufficient consultation. I think in contrast, we see that there are a number of but also even when you compare that with the Western models, that at least from the government perspective in Zimbabwe, is that Chinese financing is fast, it's flexible, there are fewer conditions, whereas the Western models seem to be slower, takes time to actually agree on the interest much higher compared to China. Yeah, I think I just thought this is something that would capture from an African and actually for most countries that were included in this study. I captured a quotation from the former Minister of Foreign Affairs from Sierra Leone, who says that there is a difference between Chinese or Western models around financing. And he says what they want to help you with is what you have identified as your need. So this is referring to the Chinese, financing or finance institutions. What they want to help you with is what you have identified as your development need. But in contrast, when it comes to Western, they identify your needs. So this is something I thought would, at least for us, bring the point more closer to home, why a lot of countries with the resources would prefer to at least get from China. That highlights that. I think, in conclusion, with the number of around ensuring that governments that are replaced in future resource infrastructure arrangements, ensure that project selection is also aligned with national development plans and prioritize high economic infrastructure development projects. We see that both in Zimbabwe and DRC, and lastly, perhaps a conversation around how China should also reposition this resource for infrastructure as a credible development partner by moving from voluntary guidelines to enforceable for ESG for those particular projects that it invests in. I thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Albert. Dear participants, the reports are quite rich from each of these countries, and we would share these reports with you after this webinar. For the panelists, can you stick to the 7 minutes? For the panelists remaining who are to speak, 7 minutes. You can leave all the details and we'll share them with the participants. Please stick to the 7 minutes for us to have time at the end to have chat and answer the questions being raised by the participants. Our next speaker is Sama Chikwanka, works with Publish What You Pay Zambia. He's going to share with us the case for infrastructure-backed loans in Zambia. Sama is an inclusive development expert with experience in development policy, research, strategy development, capacity building, human rights, and inclusive programming, as well as focuses on tax and ecological justice across Southern Africa. He has enabled cross-sectional and interdisciplinary dialogues for inclusive and broad-based development. He drives just or joint CSO advocacy while fostering sustainable confidence for an open, transparent, and accountable extractive sector as key to enhance governance of Zambia's natural resources. As the National Director of Publish What You Pay Zambia, SAMAS supports collaborative work between government, companies, and communities, and he holds an MA in Development Studies and a BA in Adult Education. Sama, please take us through the Zambia case. Please stick to the 7 minutes to give us the opportunity to have a chat at the end. Over and Sama.
Thank you so much, moderator. Good day, everybody. The privilege of being one of the last speakers or a speaker towards the end is that, you know, you have to stick to the 7 minutes, but also admittedly, because many of the issues would have been covered and addressed by previous speakers. So yes, privileged moderator to have considered Zambia as one of the countries to learn from, you know, in terms of how this resource for infrastructure has facilitated development and what opportunities therein are. And if you allow me, just to preserve our bandwidth, to allow me to speak off camera, I'll do my best to stick to the allocated time. And I do have a slide that we can share with the speaker, the participants at the stage. But for purposes of just allowing them to follow, I'll just put one slide on the screen, which speaks to the issues or the areas that we have covered in our presentation, some sort of our agenda for this conversation. So I'll just share that slide. I hope people can see it. Are you able to see it? It's not, for me, it's not opening. Okay, there we go.
Yes, we can see that, Sama.
Okay, perfect. So I'll keep that one for now and just share that our presentation reflects on the governance, fiscal risks, as well as a reflection on development outcomes. But let me also just start by setting briefly the context, which are sort of driving our appetite for this resource for infrastructure. Of course, you know, the persistent infrastructure gaps that are existing in our country in the area of transport, energy, and general urban systems. There's also limited access to traditional financing and constrained fiscal space, you know, due to increased debt. We, as a country, also see the need to accelerate, you know, infrastructure delivery without, you know, immediate fiscal pressure, which is sort of a contradiction there. We want to grow our infrastructure and yet not face the fiscal pressure associated with that. There's also a shift towards resource-based financing, you know, as a more practical or pragmatic solution to, you know, some of the challenges alluded to a few seconds ago. But we also know that, you know, Zambia is the 7th, you know, producer of copper, and therefore copper becomes very central, you know, in the conversation, and this begins to underpin most of the resource for infrastructure agreements as a repayment mechanism. Of course, this same copper enables access to infrastructure financing, and inadvertently creates exposures, you know, to various commodity price volatility revenue instability, as well as debt servicing risk. And these are aspects of the conversation that resource-rich countries have no or little control over. We end up finding ourselves in situations where this reinforces dependency on a single export commodity. But what is the structure of these contracts? What is eminent, what is common, really is a lot of opacity as we review, and I think our colleagues have already spoken to elements to do that. Maybe even before I speak to the opacity, there is one strength, one positive outcome that we can take away. And this is the flexible structure that enables tailored financing as well as faster project development. And I don't want to belabor this point because colleagues have already spoken to how the Chinese model or the funds from the East have facilitated, easy access to financing that is sort of tailored. But then we see hidden weaknesses there because of the complex arrangements related to liabilities that are not made public. The repayment terms are unclear, and there's very limited standardization. As I mentioned briefly about transparency gaps, and this is something that colleagues have spoken to, so I won't belabor that much. And then the governance challenges that we want to share as a result of our experience, are related to limited institutional capacity to be able to monitor, these complex agreements. And linked to that are the weak accountability mechanisms as well as enforcement. I mean, who else apart from government and the Chinese banks and, are involved in providing oversight? We'll be speaking to the role of Parliament there as one of the things that we see as a potential for increased oversight and public accountability. There's also low public access to contract and project information, sort of repeating what I referred to a little earlier. But also ultimately, how do you assess, do you have capacity to assess value for money, comprehensively understand the fiscal exposure associated with that, and who is actually, doing performance, project performance appraisals, reviews, and just working, with the project as it unfolds. We also see a couple of fiscal risk pathways associated with resource for infrastructure model, one of which is debt accumulation. As you know, this is perhaps something that I don't want to belabor again, that because this is money, that is acquired in advance, and therefore, the country remains indebted. There is also some level of revenue pre-commitment, where you are saying, okay, when you produce this quantum of copper, in our case, you are going to sell it to us, and you can't sell to anybody else. The commodity shocks I made reference to a little earlier, and the current foreign currency exposure, all these heighten the country's vulnerability in this scheme. Of course, these fiscal risk pathways speak to the need for, stronger budget buffers, some level of debt integration, and reporting mechanisms. I don't want to sound like we're just complaining. Yes, this resource for infrastructure has really facilitated in more ways than one, improved access to markets through transport connectivity. Some of the projects that have been financed include energy, in the area of energy generation. A colleague mentioned Kariba. Kariba is a shared facility, economic facility between the two neighboring countries. And similarly, the arrangements, sort of spill into some sort of a bilateral. But also, I think there's been some sort of support for economic activity in key, identified sectors of the economy. some of the challenges, uneven regional distribution of benefits. So when you want to develop the country, you realize that in one part of the country seems to be taking more and not the other. So the distribution of benefits from this. And then the alignment of these investments within the overall, for example, National Development Plan. It's not very clear. The targets, means of verification, the indicators. When you read the full report, you understand, you see the inconsistencies therein. There are also, limitations associated with the resourceful infrastructure model. And again, the concentration of benefits usually in urban and mining regions, but most of our countries have a rural side to them as well. Inclusiveness, again, the integration with the broad development strategy, and then the risk of reinforcing structural dependency on extractives. I mean, we are all talking about diversifying our economies, but with these models that are linked to resources, natural resources, we see economies that are increasingly going to be enclaves, as it were. What would you like to see for this country? What are some of the issues or areas that we think are priority? I think one of them is strengthening a transparency. I think I already mentioned this, enhancing oversight, and we are hoping to increase the role of the National Assembly or the Parliament. Improving fiscal management. Hopefully, we can integrate the resource for infrastructure into debt and budget frameworks. I think that would help, improve our overall fiscal management capacity as a whole. We would also wish to explore diversifying the risk so that we can reduce the reliance, on this copper-linked repayment, and also maximize local value. If we could, now we have a local content sort of legislation, and perhaps strengthening that could help also in technological transfer. In conclusion, moderator, we note and want to submit that indeed this R4I can support infrastructure delivery, under fiscal constraints. However, the current implementation presents, identified governance risks. We've spoken to the fiscal vulnerabilities as well as the uneven development outcomes. I want to end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sama, for those insights from Zambia. Our last presenter would be Jean-Pierre. He will be speaking on the DRC case. Jean-Pierre Luamba is the Director of Human Rights Program, a human rights defender and researcher on the governance of the extractive industries and sustainable development. He works on issues related to corporate social responsibility and community development. A facilitator and trainer in training sessions, he supports local communities in capacity building, structuring into community organizations, and advocacy. With his experience in the Congolese extractive sector, he has conducted numerous research studies, contributed to the drafting of investigative reports, as well as promoting responsible mining for the benefit of local communities. Jean-Pierre, vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît. 5 à 7 minutes, c'est bon. We've got the comprehensive
5 or 7 minutes works, so that we can stay within the restricted time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I don't know if I can show my presentation. My presentation will focus on the main results of the study on the resources for infrastructure in the context of the DRC. More specifically on the Busanga project, hydroelectrical project. I don't know, Eric, if you can help me to share my screen. Can you help me, Eric, with the sharing of my screen?
Jean-Pierre, your slides, do you have your slides? I don't have your slides at the moment. But you can share the screen. You can share your screen and the presentation if you can. Can you do that from your end?
Oui, merci. J'essaye de le faire,
Yes, I'm
mais
going to try to do that.
apparemment, je suis limité. Je
But
n'arrive
apparently I have a restriction. I
à
cannot
partager
share. Let
mon
me
écran.
see if you can allow me maybe to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Ouais.
From the back end, you should have permission to share.
Malheureusement,
Unfortunately, Eric,
pas.
I still cannot share my
Euh,
screen, unfortunately.
Um,
1 second.
Non, je n'arrive toujours pas.
No, still can't,
Partager mon
unfortunately.
écran.
I can't share my screen.
Et maintenant?
What about now?
Euh,
Let's see. Try now.
ok, ça persiste. Non, je ne parviens pas. Ouais, je ne
No,
parviens pas,
I cannot.
malheureusement.
Unfortunately, I cannot.
Est-ce que vous pouvez m'envoyer... Oh, ça vient, hein, ça vient. Il faut juste patienter un peu.
I think that it was a matter of waiting a couple of minutes
Yeah.
because now I can, but I think this is the whiteboard.
Yeah. So, now?
Oh oui, tout à fait.
Yes.
Non. Non.
Et,
It's showing whiteboard.
non.
Non. Est-ce que vous pouvez m'envoyer ça, Jean-Pierre? C'est possible. Je peux,
Oui, je vous l'envoie.
et j'essaie de...
Alors, je viens de vous l'envoyer sur votre
I just sent it to
WhatsApp.
you on WhatsApp.
WhatsApp?
Aussi par votre mail. Je viens de le
And
faire.
also by email. So I sent you the presentation on WhatsApp and via email.
Maybe while Eric is loading that, you can
Yeah, you
start
can
the
speak.
presentation. Yes, because we only have 7 minutes left.
Ouais, je pense que je peux commencer par la présentation.
Sure,
Alors,
I can
oui,
start with
pendant
my
que
presentation.
Eric,
So
met
while
ses
Eric
écrans,
starts sharing the screen,
voilà,
I will
ce
start
serait
with
une
my
présentation
presentation. So
assez
like I was
focalisée
saying
sur
before, we will focus with this
principaux constats
presentation
de
on the key
l'étude
results of
sur
the study
les
on
ressources
the
et
R4I
les infrastructures dans le contexte de la
agreement
RDC.
in the context
Et
of the
comme dans
Democratic Republic of
d'autres pays
Congo.
africains, en
And
RDC,
just like
le
in
modèle
other
ressources
African
infrastructures
countries, the
repose
R4I
sur
model
des accords de coopération
has as a
signés entre
basis
la
the cooperation
RDC
agreement
et
signed
la Chine
between
en
the
2007
DRC and
et
China
en
in
2008.
2007 and
Donc, il s'agit
2008.
des accords qui datent
This
il y a de
is an
cela 18 ans
agreement
aujourd'hui.
that
Et
is
cet
already
accord
18
consacre
years
deux grands
old
projets.
today.
Premièrement,
And it has two main
les
projects.
projets
One
de
is
développement d'une
the
joint venture
development projects of a
qui
joint
va exploiter du
venture
gisement de
that will
cuivre et de
be
cobalt en RDC.
exploiting
Et le
cobalt
deuxième
and
projet
copper
porte
in
sur
DRC.
la réalisation des
And
infrastructures.
the other one
Et
is
la
for
finalité
infrastructure.
de ces accords,
The
c'est
purpose
justement de
of these
réaliser
agreements
des
is precisely
infrastructures dans plusieurs
to
régions du pays
develop
afin
infrastructures in
d'impulser
different regions of
leur
the country
développement.
in order
Et
to
alors,
promote
quel est
their
le mécanisme mis
development.
en place?
So
En
what
fait,
is the
premièrement,
funding
la
mechanism?
partie
So
chinoise qui est représentée
first of
par le groupement
all, the
d'entreprises chinois
Chinese part,
devait
represented by the
mobiliser
Chinese
des fonds. En
companies,
réalité, ce
has
sont
to
des prêts
mobilize funds.
pour
These are
financer des
actually loans
infrastructures,
and co-finance
mais
the
aussi financer le
infrastructure,
développement
but
du projet
also
minier.
finance the development of the
Deuxièmement, la
mining
RDC
project. in the DRC and China together had to implement a mining joint venture. Today it is called SICOMIN, which had to exploit the mineral resources in copper and cobalt in the DRC. And this had to produce revenues to reimburse the loans. In theory, these mechanisms were the best option for the DRC because on the one hand, the DRC had the benefit of the infrastructures and in exchange for these revenues, but also it was a substantial benefit for the government. But then a lot of government problems arose, and they are sufficiently, and they have been sufficiently documented in several reports. We have several examples, including reports published by the SAMPAV coalition. And the main results are that the study shows the asymmetry in the execution and the prioritization of investments. You are going to see in this presentation, first of all, a significant imbalance in the execution of the project. The component for mining is much stronger than the infrastructure component, whereas at the beginning, the project was supposed to finance both at the same time. And just as an example, as you are going to see in 2021, for example, 13 years after the signature of these contracts, the mining component was executed at 64%, and this included financing, construction, and the production of the SICOMIN component, whereas the infrastructure component was less than 50%, as you are going to see, and there were zero obligations that were totally executed. There were 5 in partial execution in terms of infrastructure, whereas in the mining component, 11 projects were fully completed and 3 only were in partial implementation. So there were significant delays in the completion of the projects with respect to the infrastructure component. The other problem was opacity and impact on public finances. We had a financial opacity that could not be explained in terms of the amounts disbursed by the Chinese government and the ones that were actually executed. So there was a significant question, which is whether the infrastructures were financed by new loans or directly by benefits generated for these communities. And the study also showed a critical perspective on the projects of the hydroelectrical plant of Busanga, that hydroelectric project that enters within the convention signed between the DRC and China. The specific characteristic of this project is that it had as a goal it had to be financed in equal parts, so 50%. And the objective of this project was to provide 240 megawatts of energy to SICOMIN and so mainly to power SICOMIN and to provide 170 megawatts for its optimal operation. But the question here is to know what are the main findings in these hydroelectrical projects. The report shows the imbalance between the contributions of the different parties of the agreement and the distribution of shares. As you can see, both parties supposedly had to enter into a balanced partnership. So the question was why the DRC was first having 49% after the agreement signed in 2010, and then in the end 46% against the rest for China after the agreement signed in 2016. Sorry, 25% versus 75%. So the contributions from the DRC were actually
logiquement
so of course the value in the joint venture ended up being very disbalanced. In addition to these problems, there was another issue that was observed, which is the opacity in the management of what was happening in the DRC, where there was three shareholders, Gécamines and private companies from the north of Congo, which had 15% of the shares, and public companies such as Gécamines and Esnet had only minority shares against the private companies that retained most of the shares. But there was also a problem in the asymmetry of risks because the DRC, which provided or undertook the main risks, ended up losing the control, the decision-making ability in the project, whereas the Chinese party ended up controlling entirely the benefits, the operational benefits of this project. So this is an overview of the findings that were obtained with the infrastructure project and the resources in the case of the DRC. Just to conclude, the resources for infrastructure model for the DRC was a powerful but risky development tool. In the DRC, the structural imbalance between mining and infrastructure, together with a lack of transparency, has so far limited its actual and real transformative impact at a national level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Pierre. Thanks very much for that insightful presentation from the DRC. Again, we've got the report, which you can dig deep into that to get more insights on the findings from those different countries. To quickly wrap up, just to pull it together, we see generally that there are kind of a mix of findings from the different countries. Generally, from the 5 case studies, we can see a general governance capacity which strongly shapes the resource for infrastructure outcome. There were issues of transparency deficits, limited disclosure, confidential contracts, oversight gaps, infrastructure gains often accompanied by huge debt risk, and of course, limited structural economic transformation in all the 5 cases. There were issues of local economic spillover, which was clearly not seen in all the cases, generally with limited technology transfer, dependence on foreign operators and short-term employment gains, weak integration with the domestic industrial development. Of course, the resource for infrastructure could mobilize infrastructure finances in resource-rich countries. Unfortunately, there are weak governance frameworks that reduce development benefits in the case studies which we've seen, and the future successes will require stronger transparency, safeguards, and institutional oversight. Thank you very much for listening to the presentations. We've got a few questions and answers on the charts. Some of the panelists have responded to some of those questions, including issues of who benefits from the different investments from China. That came out clearly in the presentations. We want to sincerely thank everyone who showed up for this session. And we will be sharing the reports and the recommendations that came out of that, and we'll certainly convene other sessions again to dig deep into the findings of this research. So keep your ears open. We would communicate more information with the findings and the next steps going forward. Thank you very much to our interpreters and the presenters. And we sincerely apologize for the rush at the end of the session, and we would make up for this when we convene the next sessions to discuss the findings of this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks everyone.
You're welcome, Albert.
Merci à tous.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samo.
Merci, merci.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Eric. Merci à tous.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you all again.